Well, I'm joined now by former Labour MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me. Right, what do you think? Do you think Labour have a hope to win the next election? Have they got it in the bag?
No, absolutely not. That's disastrous. I mean, look, the Tories could win the next election. It's a two-horse race, and we're 2 years away from it. But look, I think the key thing is, and Andrew will probably confirm this. One of the awful rules of British politics is nobody wins an election. The other party loses it, and at the moment the Tories are coming apart like a flat pattern wardrobe. And there's no question about that. But we've been here before. I think there's something in the air, and I think in '79 I remember we had no chance. We knew the Tories were coming. 2008 to 2010 we just sat around waiting for the Etonians because we knew that they were coming over the hill. '97 the Tory Party was mired in sleaze. Some of the most ghastly, lubricious scandals you could ever sit down and imagine were being played out in front of our eyes. And it wasn't what Labour was going to say, it was going to do. It wasn't our policies. It was just the fact that we were different. We were new. Hard to think of me ever being sort of fresh and bright and, like a spring lamb. But, Labour was new in '97. I think what's happening this time is that Keir Starmer realised it isn't good enough to simply say we're not the Tories, which is why we're going to get a whole raft of policy announcements this week. But interestingly, you've never forget the fact that the Tories have currently got a majority in the high 70s. They haven't got the 80 majority anymore. It's a hell of a mountain to climb. So you ask a simple question: can the Tories win the next election? I say yes, of course they can. For the sake of the country, I certainly hope they don't.
What if they fix the economy, though? This could be, and as you said, next week the Labour Party will come out with some policies. One of their policies was about private schools and removing the charitable status, which I don't think polls that well for most people. I mean, what do you make of those sort of policies? Do you think that that's their way forward? Is that how they should be going?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting policy, this, because do you remember mansion tax? The idea was that if you had a house, and this is going back a few years, and I remember knocking on doors all over my old patch saying, look, support us, we're going to have the mansion tax. And they said, well, no, that might hurt me. And I said, well, hang on a second, your house is worth shirt buttons, and they said, yes, but one day I hope I will have a house that's worth $1 million. So when you say about the public schools, people are saying it isn't right that they get VAT exemption as charities, because they're obviously demonstrably not charities. Public schools are a business, a cold-hearted, cold-headed business. However, the people who pay the fees for their children to go to public school have already paid tax.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Wouldn't it be more they've already paid, so they're paying tax twice. So I think it'd probably be more sensible to go the other way around and say, look, if you send your kids to private school, then maybe you should get a tax exemption for that. I'm no fan of public schools. I mean, it's an odd factor that in my borough of Ealing, 2 out of the 3 MPs are privately educated. So, the Labour Party's got an awful lot of people who went to public school.
You think what they'd do, though, would be that they would try and fix the education system of the state sector so they don't need to sort of level down, which is what they sound like they're doing. OK, so what do you make of the growing list of... Well, that's it. Well, what do you make of the growing list of senior Tory MPs who are leaving the party? They're standing down for the next election.
Well, I've not mentioned sinking ships or rodents because you don't. But it's interesting. There's a lot of Labour MPs are standing down too. But the difference is that most of the Labour MPs are standing down to people like Harriet Harman and Barry Sherman, who are not in the first flush of youth. What's interesting is people like William Bragg and Dehenna Davidson and people like that, the young Tories, are just looking and say, I really, really don't fancy 10 years in opposition. And that's going to be, I think, one of the markers. You see, it's about the mood. People don't drill down into sort of section 644 of your manifesto. It's the mood. And the mood at the moment is the Tories are lost. They've completely crashed the economy. The rats are leaving the ship, and that's the mood. It's up to Labour to prove that we're actually worthy and we have an alternative, not necessarily shaking hands with Cyril Ramaphosa with all the stuff that's coming out about him this week.
Interesting. Well, you say rats leaving a sinking ship. It does look a little bit like that. It's a bit unfair.
Can I take that back? I didn't actually mean to say rats. I mean, I like Sajid Javid. He's a decent bloke. All
right, so he's all right then. Stay right there, Steve. I'm also joined by former Tory MP Anne Widdecombe. Anne, thank you so much for joining me. So what do you think the Tories need? Oh, we've lost Anne. She's waited all that time now. She's gone. We'll try and get her back. But just wondering what the Tories need to do in order to pull back in the polls. So I might as well go back to Stephen then and just see he gets a bit more airtime. Oh, no, Anne's back. She's back. Anne, great to have your company. So what do you think then? What do the Tories need in order to pull it back in the polls? Do you think the economy will do it? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't place too much emphasis on the number of Tories who are leaving at the moment. I mean, quite stupidly, what the Conservative Party has done is to say that they have to declare whether they're going to stand or gain again or not by Monday. Now, that simply means that everybody who was thinking about it and might have gone one way or the other is suddenly forced to take a decision. And it's a bit like, you know, the COVID regulations when they decided to have a curfew and everybody was out all at the same time. And that's what they've done now. They've imposed a deadline that's embarrassed themselves, idiots. Anyway, that is the first thing. Secondly, you know, it's always disappointing when people decide to stand down, but Labour MPs are standing down as well, which is perfectly normal in this period before an election. But what haven't we got? And I think this is significant. We haven't got people crossing the floor. Now, before 79, you had people like Reg Prentice coming towards the Conservatives. Coming up to 97, you had Peter Thurnham, you had Quentin Davis, you had Alan Howarth, who was a whip. You had a number of Tories moving on to the other side of the House. You haven't got that at the moment, and that means people aren't actually giving up. So to answer your central question, which is what do they have to do? They have to act like Tories. You know, and the budget has not gone down well, and it hasn't done Rishi any good. It hasn't improved his standing in the country. If anything, it's gone the other way. And what people wanted was Trussonomics, but administered rather more sensibly and rather more carefully and rather more gradually. But they want a vision of a low-tax competitive economy. They don't want to feel that there's misery. It's just going to go on and on and on, and that's what Rishi Sunak is offering them.
There literally doesn't seem to be any end in sight for the misery. It's like he just wants us to pay off the debt. I mean, Liz Truss would have sort of held it back and treated it like a war debt, which I think is a much more realistic proposition. Do you think, though, the way they're going, because they do seem to be heading towards the left, do you think they're leading the way, leaving the room open for a new centre-right party to take charge? Do you think that they could actually find themselves in third place?
I don't think so. We've been through this before. I know it's a long time ago, but it's within the living memory of some oldies like me. You know, in the 1980s, very senior Labour members, very senior, former Foreign Secretary, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, formed a new party called the Social Democratic Party, the SDP. They had an electoral alliance with the Liberal Party. And the idea was that this was going to be a completely new sea change in British politics. You know, you were going to have the centre coming through. Well, the centre won by-elections, and centre won local elections. Come the general election, centre disappeared. Because people are asking themselves in a general election one big question. They're not saying, who do I want? They're saying, who do I not want? And that is why in 92, when I assumed we'd lost the election in 92. I gave my civil servants a farewell drink. I took all my pot plants home from the office. I assumed we'd lost. We won. And we won because the electorate were far more scared of Kinnock and the Labour Party manifesto than they were of the Conservatives, who were divided by the Maastricht votes and beset by sleaze and everything else. That was a better bet. When the opposition was Tony Blair, of whom people were not afraid, then they could take the risk. Come a general election, people won't bother with third parties. They'll be asking themselves, whom do I fear?
So with that in mind, do you think that Sir Keir Starmer has what it takes to actually lead? Because obviously there was Jeremy Corbyn and people literally ran away from the Labour Party on the strength of him. Do you think that now Keir has comfortably convinced people that they can put their faith in him?
No, Keir Starmer is not Tony Blair. I think he might be able to convince people for a short while, you know, that he is not a dangerous man and therefore, you know, he's a fairly comfortable alternative if they don't really want these Tories for any longer. But there are 2 years to go. And in 2 years, many a slip can be made. And I've seen nothing about Keir Starmer that tells me that this is an inspirational leader. He relies entirely on not being the other party, on being somebody who doesn't worry people, somebody who doesn't make them afraid. But that's very different from inspirational. And there's 2 years for that to go wrong.
There is, isn't there? Let's bring Stephen Pound back in there. Let's see where he is. Stephen, there's 2 years for it to go wrong. Do you see Keir Starmer as the person who could potentially take this away? Do you think people will actually have put their faith in him?
Well, if you'd just allow me to say that Anne Widdecombe looks 20 years younger since she left Parliament, so I hope that I don't think that actually applies to me. But you are looking great. Look, there has been at least one Tory across the board. Christian Wakeford in Bury North is now a Labour candidate at the next election. Just under 100 councillors have actually gone from Tory to Labour. But I think the thing with Keir Starmer is, you're absolutely right. He's not Tony Blair, but he's more of a Clement Attlee figure, a managerial figure. You know, he's not going to be standing on the barricades leading everybody to the revolution, but he's going to be an efficient, calm, sober, honest, trustworthy, decent politician. And I honestly think that's pretty much what we want at the present time.
Do you think, Anne? Do you think that's what we want?
No, I think it's the last thing we need. I think the Tories themselves massive disservice when they got rid of Boris, because Boris was inspirational, he was charismatic, he had huge personality, and he did inspire people. Now, Keir does not. Now, admittedly, nor does Rishi particularly, so you've got two rather dull little managers facing each other across the House. But in 2 years, an awful lot can happen. And the crucial thing now, and I would say this, is for the Conservative Party not to panic and not to think it's all over. And remember 1992, when everybody thought it was all over. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, the BBC were still saying that the Conservatives had lost. It was already clear by then that we'd won.
They wish. Listen, it's really good to talk to you both, Stephen. I'll give the last word.
Just pick up on quickly on the point that Anne was making about third parties. I think two of the most popular politicians we've got in the country at the present time are, whether I like it or not, are Nigel Farage and Richard Tice. And I think you've got big personalities there. And I think there is a possibility. Look, the reason what's different about now and different from the SDP Liberal Alliance and all that stuff is that we're now in the world of retail politics. It's pick and mix. I mean, when I started off in politics, you were red or you were blue, and a little bit of smudge of yellow in the middle. But you voted the way your parents voted, in many cases who your grandparents voted for. Nowadays, I meet people who voted for different parties at different elections every time. I think there's a possibility. And I think if you actually have a look, I mean, Farage, I don't know how he does it, but he does have the ability to actually stir the people up. And he's probably one of the most influential politicians of the last 20 years. I don't agree with him on a single point, except proportional representation and abolition of the House of Lords. I mean, fair play to you on that. But I think, sorry, Anne, but I mean, Anne's turned it down so many times that she's got some skin in the game. But look, it's all to play for. In 2 years' time, if anybody says that it's nailed on for Labour, they're delusional.